An orphan donated her last $10, never dreaming it would lead to finding her birth parents. The thought had never crossed Maya's mind as she slipped the crumpled bill into the donation jar that cold December morning. Some acts of kindness aren't calculated. They simply flow from a heart that knows what it means to need. The homeless shelter on Westbrook Avenue was the only place that had ever felt remotely like home to Maya Reeves. Not because she lived there. She had her own tiny studio apartment now, but because at 23, having aged out of the foster system 5 years ago, she understood what it meant to search for warmth in a world that often felt indifferent. "Every dollar counts," said Mrs. Abernathy, the elderly volunteer who'd been running the shelter's annual holiday fundraiser for as long as anyone could remember. Her weathered hands trembled slightly as she placed a small paper star on the donor wall, writing Maya's name in careful cursive. Maya's fingers instinctively reached for the locket around her neck, the only possession she had from her birth parents. A simple oval pendant, tarnished and dented, with no photos inside, just a tiny inscription too worn to read. She'd stopped trying to decipher it years ago. "That's rent money, isn't it?" Mrs. Abernathy's eyes, magnified behind thick glasses, studied Maya's face. Maya shrugged, adjusting the fraying cuff of her second-hand coat. "I'll figure something out." She always did. 6 years of being shuffled between foster homes had taught her resourcefulness, if nothing else. "Well, the universe has a way of returning kindness," Mrs. Abernathy said, patting Maya's cold hand with her warm one. Maya offered a polite smile but didn't believe it. Her experience suggested the universe was largely indifferent to acts of kindness. She'd stopped expecting cosmic rewards long ago. Outside, winter had wrapped Seattle in its gray embrace. Maya pulled her thin coat tighter and started the 15-block walk to the cafe where she worked. The icy wind bit at her cheeks, but she couldn't afford the bus fare, not after giving away her last $10. The Great Cup Cafe was warm at least, even if the pay barely covered her expenses. The rich aroma of coffee beans and freshly baked pastries greeted her as she pushed through the door, the little bell announcing her arrival. "You're early," said Darius, her manager, glancing up from the espresso machine he was cleaning. At 35, with salt and pepper hair and perpetually rolled-up sleeves, he ran the cafe with precise efficiency that Maya respected. "Thought I'd get a head start on the holiday rush." In truth, she'd come early because the cafe was heated, and her apartment was not. The electricity bill had gone unpaid this month. Food had taken priority. The morning passed in a flurry of holiday drink orders. Maya moved mechanically, smiling at customers, making change, wiping down counters. Her mind was elsewhere, calculating how she'd make it through the week on what little she had left. It was during the mid-afternoon lull when it happened, the moment that would unknowingly change everything. A well-dressed man in his 50s entered, stomping snow from his expensive leather shoes. His silver hair was perfectly cut, his cashmere coat immaculate. He ordered a simple black coffee, no room for cream. Maya recognized the type. Successful, busy, probably wouldn't leave a tip. She prepared his order without much thought. "Nasty weather out there," the man commented, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't place. "Yes, sir." Maya handed him his change. He dropped the coins, all of them, into the tip jar. "Heard on the radio there's a shelter downtown that's struggling to stay open this winter." "Westbrook Avenue?" Maya asked, surprised by the personal connection. "That's the one." He took a sip of his coffee. "Apparently they're still quite short of their fundraising goal." Maya felt a pang of worry for Mrs. Abernathy and the others who depended on the shelter. "They do good work there." "Do they?" His blue eyes studied her with unexpected intensity. "You know it personally?" Something about his gaze made Maya uncomfortable, as though he could see right through her practiced customer service smile to the worry beneath. "I volunteer sometimes," she lied, not wanting to admit she'd been on the receiving end of their services. "Admirable." He pulled out a business card and placed it on the counter. "Jonathan Pierce. I'm a lawyer. I've been looking into that shelter for a client who wants to make a substantial donation, but they need more information about how the place is run." Maya glanced at the card, Pierce & Associates, with an address in the expensive downtown district. "If you have first-hand knowledge of the place," he continued, "perhaps you could tell me more sometime. My client pays for reliable information." The word "pays" caught Maya's attention like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. "I could tell you what I know," she said, trying to sound casual. "Excellent." He finished his coffee. "Tomorrow evening?" My office is closing early for the holidays, but I could meet you here at 6? Maya nodded, already calculating what a substantial payment might mean. Maybe enough to cover her rent? To turn her electricity back on? Perfect. He buttoned his coat. Oh, and what was your name? Maya. Maya Reeves. Something flickered across his face, so quickly she almost missed it. A slight widening of the eyes, a momentary freeze in his movements. Maya, he repeated as if testing the name. See you tomorrow, Maya. As he left, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, though she had no idea what it could be. That night, in her freezing apartment, Maya huddled under every blanket she owned. The temperature had dropped further, and her breath formed small clouds in the darkness. She held her locket in her palm, rubbing her thumb over its worn surface as she often did when afraid or uncertain. What did a wealthy lawyer want with information about a homeless shelter? Why had he looked at her so strangely when she'd said her name? The questions circled in her mind as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of warm rooms and faceless people calling her name. Morning brought no answers, only frost patterns on her windows and the harsh reality of another day without heat. At work, Maya found herself watching the door, anticipating the lawyer's return despite knowing he wasn't due until evening. You seem distracted, Darius commented as Maya nearly overfilled a customer's cup. Sorry, just tired. Everything okay at your place? You look cold to the bone. Maya forced a smile. Everything's fine. But everything wasn't fine, and by closing time, Maya was exhausted and nervous about meeting Jonathan Pierce. What if he was dangerous? What if this was some kind of scam? Yet when he arrived precisely at 6, he brought with him an aura of professionalism that somewhat allayed her fears. Thank you for meeting me, he said, sitting across from her at a corner table. He'd brought a leather portfolio and a tape recorder. Do you mind if I record our conversation? For my client's records? Maya hesitated, then nodded. So, tell me about Westbrook Avenue Shelter. How long have you known about it? Maya began carefully, sharing general information about the shelter's services, careful not to reveal how intimately she knew them. But as Jonathan asked more specific questions about Mrs. Abernathy, about the donation system, about the people who frequented the place, Maya found herself sharing more than she'd intended. And you said you volunteer there? He pressed, after nearly 40 minutes of conversation. The lie had become increasingly difficult to maintain. Not exactly, Maya admitted. I stayed there sometimes. When I was younger? Jonathan's pen paused over his notepad. You were homeless? I aged out of foster care at 18. There were some rough patches. Maya found herself touching her locket again, a nervous habit. His eyes followed the movement. That's an interesting piece of jewelry. Maya's hand fell away. It's nothing. Just something I've had forever. May I see it? The request seemed odd, but Maya slowly removed the locket and handed it to him. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, his warm, hers still cold from her unheated apartment. Jonathan examined it carefully, turning it over in his palm. There's an inscription, he noted. It's too worn to read, Maya said. I've tried. He pulled out a small magnifying glass from his pocket, the kind jewelers use, and studied the locket more closely. With the right equipment, this might be readable. You think so? Despite herself, Maya felt a flicker of hope. The locket was her only connection to her birth parents, a mystery she'd long ago accepted would never be solved. Jonathan returned the locket, his expression unreadable. Thank you for your time, Maya. This has been very informative. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. For your assistance. Inside was $500, more money than Maya had seen at once in years. This is too much, she said, though her fingers clutched the envelope tightly. Not at all. My client is very generous. He packed away his recorder and stood. One more question. Do you have a phone number where I can reach you if I need further information? Maya wrote her number on a napkin, still dazed by the money in her hand. Thank you, Maya. I'll be in touch. As she watched him leave, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something about this exchange wasn't quite what it seemed. But with $500 in her pocket, enough for rent and to turn her heat back on, she wasn't inclined to question her good fortune too deeply. That night, for the first time in weeks, Maya fell asleep in a warm apartment, the envelope tucked safely under her mattress. Her dreams were vivid, a woman singing a lullaby, strong arms holding her, the scent of lilacs. She woke with tears on her cheeks, reaching for memories that dissolved like mist in the morning light. 3 days passed without word from Jonathan Pierce. Maya began to think their strange encounter was over. He'd gotten the information he needed, paid generously, and that was that. She'd used some of the money to buy a proper winter coat, splurged on actual groceries instead of ramen noodles, and still had enough left to feel a brief respite from her usual financial anxiety. Then, on Christmas Eve morning, her phone rang. An unknown number. "Maya? Jonathan Pierce here. I wonder if you might meet me today. There's someone I'd like you to talk to about the shelter." "It's Christmas Eve," Maya said, surprised by the timing. "I know, and I apologize for the inconvenience, but this is rather important. My client is prepared to offer a substantial donation, but they'd like to speak with someone who has first-hand experience before committing." Maya thought of Mrs. Abernathy and the others who depended on the shelter. "All right, where and when?" 3 o'clock? "Not at my office. It's closed for the holiday." "Perhaps the Fairmont Hotel lobby? It's a public place and my client will feel comfortable there." The Fairmont was one of Seattle's most luxurious hotels, a place Maya had never had reason to enter. "I'll be there," she said, curiosity overcoming her hesitation. The hotel lobby was decorated for Christmas with tasteful elegance, a towering tree adorned with gold and white ornaments, subtle pine garlands along the marble columns, soft holiday music playing from hidden speakers. Maya felt painfully out of place despite her new coat. Jonathan was waiting near the fireplace, along with an elegant woman who appeared to be in her early 50s. Her hair was a rich auburn with subtle gray at the temples, styled in a sophisticated bob. She wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater and pearls at her throat. "Maya, thank you for coming," Jonathan said, standing as she approached. "This is Catherine Blackwood, my client." The woman's eyes, a striking green, fixed on Maya with an intensity that was almost physical. She extended a manicured hand. "It's very nice to meet you, Maya." "You as well," Maya replied, acutely aware of the calluses on her own palm from years of manual labor. "Please sit." Catherine gestured to a plush chair. "Would you like some tea? Or perhaps hot chocolate? It is Christmas Eve, after all." The kindness in her voice was unexpected. Maya accepted the hot chocolate, and for the next half hour found herself answering Catherine's questions about the shelter, what it needed most, who it served, how it operated day to day. What struck Maya as odd was that Catherine seemed more interested in her than in the shelter. Questions about Maya's work at the cafe, her education, incomplete community college, she couldn't afford to continue. Her interests, reading when she could find free books, were interspersed with queries about Westbrook Avenue. "And how long were you in foster care?" Catherine asked, her voice gentle but direct. Maya glanced at Jonathan, who nodded encouragingly. "Since I was 3, Maya answered. "I don't remember anything before that." "Nothing at all?" Catherine pressed, setting down her teacup with a slight tremor in her hand. "Just fragments. A song sometimes. The smell of lilacs." Maya shrugged. "Nothing useful." Catherine and Jonathan exchanged a look that Maya couldn't interpret. "Maya," Jonathan said carefully, "I haven't been entirely forthcoming about why I approached you." A cold knot formed in Maya's stomach. "What do you mean?" "Show her," Catherine said softly. Jonathan reached into his portfolio and removed a photograph, placing it carefully on the table between them. It showed a young couple standing in front of a Christmas tree, the woman holding a small child, a little girl about 2 years old. The child wore a tiny locket around her neck. Maya's hand instinctively went to her own locket. The resemblance between the one in the photo and the one she wore was unmistakable. "Who are they?" she whispered, though a part of her already knew the answer. "Michael and Catherine Reeves," Jonathan said. "And their daughter, Maya." The room seemed to tilt. "That's not possible. My last name is Reeves because that's what was on my abandonment paperwork. I was found at a hospital with just my first name and this locket." "You weren't abandoned," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "You were taken." The story emerged in fragments, pieced together through Catherine's tears and Jonathan's calm legal explanations. Maya hadn't been abandoned. She had been kidnapped during a family vacation to Seattle 20 years ago. An estranged former employee of Michael Reeves's company, seeking revenge for perceived wrongs, had taken 3-year-old Maya from a hotel room while her parents slept. The kidnapper had apparently abandoned Maya at a hospital emergency room days later when he realized the magnitude of what he'd done. But by then, he'd crossed state lines, given false information, and the connection between the abandoned child in Oregon and the kidnapped girl from Chicago was never made. "We never stopped looking," Catherine said, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Ever. For 20 years. My husband died 3 years ago, she continued. His last words to me were, "Find our girl," and I promised him I would. Jonathan took over, explaining how he'd been hired as a private investigator specializing in cold cases, how they'd been systematically searching shelters and social service organizations across the Pacific Northwest, following the faintest of leads. And then, he said, I heard a radio story about Westbrook Avenue Shelter's fundraiser. They mentioned a young woman who donated her last $10, a former foster child named Maya Reeves. The name couldn't be coincidence, Catherine said. I convinced Jonathan to find you, to see if there was any possibility. The locket, Maya whispered, understanding dawning. That's why you were so interested in it. Jonathan nodded. It was custom-made, one of a kind. The inscription reads, "For our Maya Rose, forever loved." We needed to confirm it was the same one. Maya's fingers traced the worn metal at her throat. My middle name is Rose? Yes, Catherine said, tears flowing freely now. Maya Rose Reeves, born April 12th in Chicago. You loved strawberries and hated peas. Your favorite stuffed animal was a purple elephant named Trunks. You called the moon the nightlight in the sky. Each detail hit Maya like a physical blow, fragments of a life she couldn't remember but that had been meticulously preserved in someone else's heart for 20 years. I don't understand, Maya said, her own eyes filling with tears. If you're really my mother, how can you be sure? Don't you need DNA tests or something? We've already done them, Jonathan said gently. When I took your coffee cup that first day at the cafe, I apologize for the deception, but we needed to be certain before approaching you with this. The results came back yesterday. You are, without any doubt, Catherine and Michael Reeves's daughter. The world seemed to contract to this single moment, this impossible revelation that changed everything Maya had ever believed about herself. She wasn't unwanted. She hadn't been abandoned. She had been loved, searched for, grieved over. I can't. Maya stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her hot chocolate. I need some air. She fled to the hotel's entrance, gasping in the cold December air. Snow had begun to fall, fat, lazy flakes drifting down to melt on the pavement. Behind her, she heard footsteps but didn't turn. I know it's overwhelming, Catherine said softly, keeping a respectful distance. I'm not expecting you to accept me, right away. Or ever, if that's your choice. I needed you to know the truth. That you were loved. That you are loved. Maya turned slowly. In Catherine's face, in the shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw, Maya saw echoes of her own reflection. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Catherine assured her. Jonathan has all the documentation, the original police reports, the DNA results, birth certificates, everything you might want to see. Take time to process this. Maya nodded, overwhelmed. I'm staying at this hotel through New Year's, Catherine added. I have a flight back to Chicago on the 2nd. If you want to talk about anything, I'm in room 712. No pressure, no expectations. With that, she turned to go back inside, leaving Maya alone with the falling snow and 20 years of rewritten history. That night, in her apartment, which now felt even smaller, even more temporary, Maya spread out the folder Jonathan had given her. Birth certificate, childhood photos, newspaper clippings about her kidnapping, police reports, the DNA test results. Evidence of a life she should have had. There were photos of a beautiful home in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood, of family Christmases, of her father, a tall man with Maya's same deep brown eyes and serious expression, of Catherine through the years, always with a sadness behind her smile that was visible even in the happiest moments. Most devastating was a photo of Maya's childhood bedroom, preserved exactly as it had been the day she disappeared. Frozen in time, waiting for a little girl who never came home. Maya wept until there were no tears left, clutching her locket, understanding now why she'd never been able to part with it even in her most desperate times. Some part of her had known it was her connection to something important, something lost. Dawn found her still awake, watching the sunrise paint her small apartment in shades of gold and pink. A decision crystallized in her exhausted mind. She showered, dressed in her best clothes, still humble by most standards, and made her way back to the Fairmont Hotel. It was barely 7 in the morning when she knocked on door 712. Catherine opened it immediately, as though she'd been waiting, hoping. She was still in her nightgown and robe, her hair sleep-tousled, her face bare of makeup. I have questions, Maya said simply. Of course. All of them. Whatever you want to know. Catherine stepped aside to let her in. They talked for hours about the day Maya was taken, about the desperate search that followed, about Maya's father, a self-made businessman who'd never fully recovered from losing his only child, about the years Catherine had spent running a foundation for missing children, channeling her grief into helping others. Maya shared too, haltingly at first, then more freely, about foster homes, some kind, some indifferent, some cruel, about aging out of the system with no safety net, about working multiple jobs to afford community college classes, only to have to drop out when rent increased, about the shelter on Westbrook Avenue that had been her refuge in the darkest times. That's why I donated, Maya explained, even though it was my last money, because they helped me when no one else would. Catherine wiped away tears. An orphan donated her last $10, never dreaming it would lead to finding her birth parents. She said softly, echoing Jonathan's radio story. If you hadn't made that donation, we might never have found each other. Maya finished. The realization hung between them. How many coincidences, how many small decisions had led to this moment? Maya donating her last money, Jonathan hearing the radio story, Mrs. Abernathy writing Maya's name on that paper star. What happens now? Maya asked, the question that had been circling in her mind since yesterday. Catherine hesitated. That's entirely up to you. I would love for you to come to Chicago, to see your home, to get to know each other properly, but I understand if that's too much. And if I did come to Chicago, then what? Then whatever you want? You could stay if you wished. The house is yours as much as mine. You could go to school. Your father left a trust fund for you that's been gathering interest for 20 years. Or you could come back here if that's what you prefer. I just want to be in your life in whatever way you'll allow. The magnitude of the choice before her was dizzying. To step into a new life, one of privilege and opportunity, but also one heavy with the grief of 20 lost years. Or to stay in the life she knew, forever changed by the knowledge that she had never been unwanted after all. I need time to think, Maya said finally. Of course. Catherine reached out hesitantly, then drew back her hand. Take all the time you need. Maya left the hotel in a daze, walking aimlessly through the Christmas Day crowds, families laughing together, children showing off new toys, the ordinary happiness she'd always observed from a distance. Her feet carried her, without conscious decision, to Westbrook Avenue. The shelter was hosting its annual Christmas dinner, a tradition Maya had participated in both as a recipient and, when she could afford it, as a donor of small gifts. Mrs. Abernathy was at the door, greeting everyone with the same warmth whether they were homeless or volunteers. Maya, she exclaimed. Merry Christmas, dear. Merry Christmas. Maya hesitated, then said, I need to talk to you about something. In the shelter's small office, Maya told Mrs. Abernathy everything, the lawyer, the mother she never knew she had, the life waiting for her in Chicago. Mrs. Abernathy listened without interruption, her aged hands folded in her lap. When Maya finished, she smiled gently. I always told you the universe returns kindness, she said. Your $10 came back to you 1,000-fold. But what should I do? Maya asked, desperate for guidance. What does your heart tell you? Maya touched her locket, that I've spent my whole life wondering where I belong. And maybe now I can find out. Mrs. Abernathy nodded. You know, when you first came here, you were so closed off, so certain that letting anyone close would only lead to more pain. But over the years, I've watched you open up, a little kindness at a time, helping that young mother with her baby, reading to the children, donating when you could barely feed yourself. She reached across and took Maya's hand. Don't you see? You've been preparing for this moment all along, learning to trust, to connect, to believe that good things can happen, even after great loss. Maya felt tears spill over. I'm scared. Of course you are. But you're also brave, braver than you know. That evening, Maya returned to the Fairmont. Catherine opened her door to find Maya standing there with a small backpack, everything she owned that mattered packed inside. I'd like to come to Chicago, Maya said, to see ... to see my home. At least for a while. Catherine's face transformed with joy. Really? You're sure? No, Maya admitted with a small laugh. I'm not sure of anything, but I want to try. Catherine stepped forward hesitantly, arms slightly raised. A question. Maya nodded, and for the first time in 20 years felt her mother's arms around her. The embrace was both strange and achingly familiar, as if her body remembered what her mind could not. And as they stood there, holding each other in the hotel doorway on Christmas night, Maya felt something shift inside her, a piece of her heart long frozen beginning to thaw. The journey ahead would not be simple. There would be awkward moments, painful conversations, adjustments on both sides. But for the first time since she could remember, Maya felt something she'd nearly forgotten existed: hope. 1 week later, as the plane lifted off from Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, Maya pressed her face to the window, watching the city grow small beneath her. The city where she'd been lost, and then, by the strangest twist of fate, found again. In her hand, she held her locket, now polished and restored by a jeweler Catherine had taken it to. The inscription was clear now: "For our Maya Rose, forever loved." Beside her, Catherine reached over and gently squeezed her hand. "Ready?" Maya took a deep breath. "Ready?" As the plane banked east toward Chicago, toward a past reclaimed and a future unwritten, Maya thought of her $10 dropped into a donation jar on a cold December morning. She couldn't have known then that she wasn't just giving money. She was casting a message in a bottle into the vast ocean of the world, a message that would, against all odds, find its way to the very person searching for her. Some might call it coincidence, others fate, Mrs. Abernathy would call it the universe returning kindness. Maya simply called it coming home.